What if you spent a fortune, a staggering $35 million, searching the globe for a single cherished memory from your childhood? For billionaire Julian Vance, it was an obsession. A hunt for a ghost named Elara, the girl with fireflies in her eyes. He employed the world's best investigators, scanned databases across continents, and chased down every whisper of her name. But the truth is always closer than we think. What Julian didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that the woman he was pouring his fortune out to find was silently polishing his silver and making his bed every single day. This is the unbelievable story of a search that spanned the world, only to end in the very heart of his own home. Julian Vance lived a life measured in zeros. His net worth fluctuated with the stock market, but the number was always preceded by a dollar sign and followed by at least 9 digits. From his penthouse office overlooking Central Park, he commanded Vance Industries, a global logistics empire built on cold, hard efficiency. His world was one of data points, profit margins, and ruthless negotiation. Yet the most valuable thing in his life couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. It was a memory fragile as a butterfly's wing of a little girl in a sun-drenched garden. Her name, as he remembered it, was Elara. She was a whisper from a past he had otherwise walled off. A childhood spent in a cavernous, lonely mansion on the coast of Maine, where his parents, Alistair and Genevieve Vance, treated affection as a foreign currency they were unwilling to spend. Elara was his only friend. The daughter of a staff member, she was a flash of color in his monochrome world. He remembered her laughter, the smudge of dirt on her cheek, and the secret language they shared. Most vividly, he remembered the day they caught a firefly in a mason jar in the estate's forgotten rose garden. In the fading light, its glow was their private star. A promise, she had whispered, her eyes wide, that we'll always find the light. Then one day she was gone. No explanation, no goodbye. It was as if she and her family had been erased from the Vance estate. When he'd asked his father, Alistair had dismissed the question with a wave of his hand. "Staff comes and goes, Julian. Forget about it." But Julian couldn't. For 30 years, the memory of Elara became a quiet, gnawing obsession. Now at 42, with the world at his feet, he had decided to act on it. He didn't want a reunion or a storybook ending. He just wanted to know that the single point of warmth in his desolate childhood was real. He wanted to thank her. The search was headquartered in a sterile, glass-walled room, 2 floors below his office. He called it the Archive. It was run by Damien Croft, a former MI6 agent with a reputation for finding the unfindable. The budget was, in Croft's words, functionally unlimited. Any progress, Julian's voice was sharp, cutting through the low hum of servers. Croft, a man with tired eyes and an expensive suit, gestured to a massive screen displaying a web of interconnected data. "We've cross-referenced every individual named Elara, born within a 5-year window, with any known employment records tied to your family's estates in North America and Europe. We've run facial recognition software on old staff photographs against global databases. We've chased down leads in Switzerland, Canada, and even a remote village in Portugal." The cost of the operation had just crossed the $35 million mark. It was a sum that could fund a tech startup or buy a private island. To Julian, it was the price of finding a ghost. And Julian pressed his jaw tight. Nothing. Croft admitted the word, hanging in the air like smoke. It's as if she vanished from the face of the earth. No birth certificate, no school records, no digital footprint that matches the profile. It's possible the name you remember, Elara, was a nickname. Julian's frustration was a palpable force in the room. He slammed his hand on the marble tabletop. A nickname, $35 million, and you bring me a linguistic theory, find her. He stormed out, leaving Croft surrounded by the monument to his failure. He took the private elevator up to his penthouse, the silence amplifying the ringing in his ears. The doors slid open to reveal polished floors and minimalist furniture that screamed wealth but offered no comfort. "Good evening, Mr. Vance," a soft voice said. He barely glanced at the woman standing by the console table, meticulously polishing a silver picture frame. She was part of the scenery, another efficient cog in the machine of his life. Her name was Maya Johnson. She was in her early 40s with kind, intelligent eyes that held a hint of sorrow he'd never bothered to notice. She was his maid, hired 6 months ago by his estate manager for her impeccable references and quiet disposition. Maya. He grunted in acknowledgement, loosening his tie as he walked past. She watched him go, her expression unreadable. She finished polishing the frame a picture of Julian's stern-faced parents and placed it back with practiced care. Her movements were graceful, economical. She was invisible, and that was how she was supposed to be. As she moved through the vast, empty apartment, she saw the discarded files on his desk maps with red pins, and the name scrawled on a notepad, Elara. A flicker of something pain-memory irony crossed her face before she carefully schooled her features back into a mask of professional neutrality. She emptied the wastebasket, her hands steady her heart, a tangled knot of secrets she had carried for 3 long decades. Maya Johnson's life was a study in quiet discipline. She arrived at the Vance penthouse at dawn and left after dusk. She cleaned with a meticulousness that bordered on reverence-restoring order to a home that held no warmth. She knew every inch of the apartment, the way the morning light hit the marble floors, the specific hum of the climate control system, the precise arrangement of books on the shelves, books Julian never read. She knew he preferred his coffee black, his toast barely browned, and his solitude uninterrupted. She knew him better than anyone, and yet he didn't know her at all. Her real name wasn't Maya. That was a name she had chosen for herself years ago, a shield to hide behind. She had been born Eleanor Johnson, but everyone had called her Ellie. To one lonely little boy in the secret language of their childhood, Ellie had somehow become Elara. She was the gardener's daughter. Her father, Thomas Johnson, had been the head groundskeeper at the Vance estate in Maine. He was a man with soil in his fingernails and magic in his hands, capable of coaxing life from the most stubborn earth. Their small cottage on the edge of the sprawling property was filled with more love and laughter than the grand mansion ever was. Ellie's world was the rustle of leaves, the scent of rain on dirt, and the steadfast, unconditional love of her father. And then there was Julian, the sad, silent boy from the big house. They had met by the old stone wall that separated the formal gardens from the wilder part of the estate. He was watching her chase butterflies, his expression a mixture of curiosity and envy. She, bold and unafraid, had simply asked him if he wanted to play. From that day on, the forgotten rose garden became their kingdom. She remembered the firefly. She remembered his gasp of wonder as its light pulsed against the glass, a tiny, captured star. She remembered the promise, but she also remembered what came after. The memory was sharp, a shard of glass in her heart. It was a rainy Tuesday. She was 8 years old. Men in dark suits led by Julian's father, Alistair Vance, had descended on their cottage. They spoke in low, angry voices. They'd accused her father of theft. A Fabergé egg, one of Mrs. Vance's prized possessions, had gone missing from the library. A witness, one of the other maids, claimed to have seen Thomas near the library on the night it disappeared. Her father, a man whose honesty was as deep-rooted as the ancient oaks he tended, was shattered. He swore his innocence, his voice thick with disbelief and hurt. But Alistair Vance was a man who did not deal in trust, only in outcomes. Thomas Johnson was dismissed, disgraced. They were given 24 hours to leave the property, their names tarnished, their lives ruined. The accusation followed them like a plague. No one would hire a man branded a thief. Her father withered the light in his eyes, dimming until it went out entirely a few years later. A man broken by a lie. Ellie Johnson ceased to exist. She became Maya, a woman who moved through the world untethered, working odd jobs, always looking over her shoulder. She learned to be invisible, to scrub away her past, with the same diligence she used on other people's flaws. Landing the job at Julian Vance's penthouse had been a cruel twist of fate. She had applied through a high-end agency, using forged references that painted a picture of a life she'd never lived. When she saw the name on the employment contract, her blood ran cold. But she was desperate, and the pay was more than she had ever earned. She took the job, telling herself it was just a name. But it wasn't. The first time she saw him stepping out of the elevator, he was no longer a boy, but a man with his father's hardened features and the same sad, lonely eyes she remembered. He looked right through her. In that moment, she felt a bitter cocktail of emotions: anger at the injustice, pity for the lost boy still trapped inside him, and a profound, aching sorrow for the two children they had been. She never said a word. What was there to say? To reveal herself would be to reopen a wound that had never truly healed. It would mean dredging up the shame and the lies that had destroyed her family. And for what? So the son of the man who ruined her father could assuage his own nostalgic guilt. Pride, fierce and unyielding, kept her silent. So she watched. She listened to his clipped, frustrated phone calls with Damien Croft. She saw the astronomical figures on the invoices for the search left carelessly on his desk. $35 million. The irony was so bitter it tasted like poison. He was spending a king's ransom to find the woman who refilled his coffee maker every morning. All he had to do was look up. One evening while Julian was out, she was dusting his cavernous bedroom. On his bedside table lay a small, leather-bound journal. It was open. Her professional code screamed at her to ignore it, but a force stronger than herself pulled her closer. His handwriting was an angular, aggressive scrawl. Croft thinks Elara was a nickname. Possible. But the feeling is real. The garden, the light, it's the only time I remember not feeling cold. If I can find her, maybe I can prove to myself that it wasn't just a dream, that I wasn't always alone. Maya closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, leaving no trace. He wasn't just searching for a person. He was searching for a feeling her father's destruction had paid for. And as she stood there, in the silent heart of his gilded cage, she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The silence she had kept for protection was beginning to feel like a weapon. The global hunt for Elara was escalating into a technological marvel of futility. Damien Croft, under immense pressure from Julian, had deployed every tool in his arsenal. His team of analysts, data miners, and field agents operated on 3 continents. They used satellite imagery to analyze the layout of the old Vance estate in Maine, hoping to pinpoint the forgotten garden and find clues. They ran advanced genealogical searches, building family trees for every employee who had ever worked for the Vances, looking for a lost daughter, a hidden niece, anyone who could be Elara. The operation was a testament to Julian's power. If a person could be found with money and technology, they would find her. The $35 million had been spent on private jets, exorbitant informant fees, and the leasing of powerful AI-driven search algorithms. Yet they were chasing a phantom, a name born of a child's lisping affection for Ellie. They searched for an Elara, and so Eleanor Johnson remained invisible. One afternoon, Arthur Pendleton, the COO of Vance Industries, and one of Julian's few trusted confidants, requested an urgent meeting. Arthur was a portly man, with a calm demeanor that belied a razor-sharp mind. He was the anchor that kept Julian's often impulsive ship from running aground. "Julian," he began, his voice gentle but firm as he sat opposite him in the vast office. "We need to talk about the archive project." "What about it?" Julian said defensively, not looking up from his tablet. "The board is getting nervous. The quarterly expenditure report showed a $35 million miscellaneous expense routed through your personal discretionary fund. That kind of money doesn't go unnoticed. It affects shareholder confidence." "It's my money, Arthur," Julian snapped. "Vance Industries is my company." "It's a publicly traded company," Arthur countered patiently. "And this is becoming more than a hobby. It's an obsession. It's affecting your focus. What is this really about?" Julian finally looked up, his eyes blazing. "It's about something that matters more than a 1/10 of a point dip in stock value. It's about finding a person. A person no one can prove even existed." The question hit a nerve. Julian stood up and walked to the window, his back to Arthur. She existed. She was real. As they spoke, Maya was in the adjacent private kitchen, preparing a tray of coffee. The door was slightly ajar, and their voices carried. She froze her hand, hovering over the sugar bowl, straining to hear. "Spending a fortune chasing a ghost from your childhood," Arthur was saying, his voice laced with concern. "Meanwhile, the world keeps turning. We have the Apex Logistics merger to finalize." "Damien has a new lead," Julian said, his voice regaining its confident edge. "A strong one. A woman named Elara Dubois, living in Geneva. Her mother was a maid for a brief time at my grandparents' summer home in the Hamptons. The timeline fits. The name fits. I'm flying out tonight." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. Geneva. A new lead. He was getting further away from the truth than ever. A strange protective instinct flared within her. It was absurd. She should be glad he was chasing a false trail on another continent. It kept her safe. But hearing the hope in his voice, knowing the crushing disappointment that awaited him, sparked a complicated emotion she couldn't name. It was a tangled mess of pity and resentment. That evening, as she performed her final tidying duties in the penthouse, she found Julian in his study. He was standing before a small framed watercolor painting on the wall, one she usually dusted without a second thought. It was a simple, amateurish depiction of a garden with a single glowing firefly. "My mother painted that," he said, without turning around. He must have seen her reflection in the glass. "It was for my 10th birthday. It was the last nice thing she ever did for me. She tried to capture the garden. Our garden." Maya said nothing, her throat tight. "She never got it right." Julian continued, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "The light was wrong." He finally turned to face her, his eyes searching hers, as if looking for an answer she couldn't possibly have. "Have you ever had a memory, Maya, that felt more real than the present?" Her heart stopped. He was seeing her. Not as a maid, not as furniture, but as a person. She held his gaze for a fraction of a second, too long. "Everyone has ghosts, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The moment was broken by the chime of his phone. It was his pilot confirming their flight plan for Geneva. The hardness returned to his face. "Have my bags brought down." He ordered the brief connection severed. As she left the study, her hand brushed against her pocket. Inside, her fingers found the smooth, worn surface of a small object she had carried with her for 30 years. It was a small wooden whittling of a firefly with tiny wings and antennae. Her father had carved it for her the day after they caught the real one. It was the only thing she had left of that life. He was flying across the world in search of a memory, while she stood in his home, holding its tangible proof in the palm of her hand. The sheer tragic absurdity of it all was beginning to feel like a cage. The trip to Geneva was a catastrophic failure. Elara Dubois was a charming elderly woman who had indeed worked for the Vances, but as a cook's assistant, and she had never met Julian. The lead, which had cost nearly $1 million to pursue, evaporated in a polite 20-minute conversation over tea. Julian returned to New York, hollowed out the embers of his hope now cold ash. The $35 million hole in his finances felt less like an investment and more like a testament to his own foolishness. He became withdrawn, his temper shorter, his presence in the office more menacing. He threw himself into the Apex Logistics merger with a vengeance, working late into the night, fueled by coffee and frustration. It was during these exhaustive late nights that the lines began to blur. His mind, starved of sleep and strained by disappointment, started playing tricks on him. He would be poring over a spreadsheet and catch a faint, familiar scent in the air. Not the expensive citrus cleaner the staff used, but the smell of damp earth and roses from the garden. He'd hear a snatch of a half-remembered lullaby being hummed softly, only to find the penthouse completely silent when he looked up. One evening he fell asleep at his desk. He dreamed of the garden, but it was different. The sunlight was sharp, the colors vivid. Elara was there, laughing, but when she turned to face him, her face was Maya's. He saw the same kind eyes, the same quiet strength. He woke with a jolt, his heart pounding. It was just stress, he told himself. His obsession was projecting itself onto the people around him. It was a logical explanation, but it didn't quell the unsettling feeling of déjà vu that had begun to permeate his home. Maya, for her part, had become more daring. The pity she felt for him had started to outweigh her fear. She began to leave little breadcrumbs, tiny echoes of their shared past, perhaps subconsciously testing the waters, or perhaps just to feel a sense of control. She started arranging the fresh flowers delivered weekly, not in the severe, modernist style the decorator dictated, but in a wilder, more natural way, just as her father had taught her. She placed a bowl of wild strawberries on his kitchen counter, remembering they had been his favorite treat, which they used to steal from the garden patch. He never commented on these changes, but she saw him pause by the flower arrangement, a flicker of confusion on his face. She saw him eat the strawberries, his expression distant, as if trying to place a long-forgotten taste. She was a ghost in his house, and she was starting to haunt him. The true keeper of the house's secrets was Mrs. Gable. Eleanor Gable had been the head housekeeper at the main estate for 50 years, starting as a young maid herself. Now in her late 70s, she managed Julian's New York penthouse with an iron will and a deep, abiding loyalty to the Vance family, or rather, to the boy she remembered, not the cold man he had become. She had known Ellie Johnson and her father well. She had been there the day Alistair Vance had ruined them, and she knew it had been a lie. Mrs. Gable had recognized Maya the day she came for her final interview. The years had changed her, but the eyes were the same. The quiet dignity was her father's legacy. She had said nothing respecting Maya's silent wish for anonymity, but now, seeing Julian's self-destructive obsession and Maya's subtle heart-breaking attempts to be seen, She felt her loyalty shift. It was no longer about protecting the Vance name, but about healing a wound that had festered for far too long. Her moment came on a Friday afternoon. Mrs. Gable had come to discuss the weekly staff schedules with Julian. She found him in his study, staring blankly at the watercolor of the firefly. It was a terrible injustice what happened to Thomas Johnson, she said, her voice clear and steady. There was no preamble, no gentle easing into the subject. Julian turned, startled. Who? Eleanor's father. Mrs. Gable said, her gaze unwavering. A good man, the best gardener we ever had. He loved that little girl more than life itself. Julian stared at her, his mind struggling to connect the name to anything. I don't know who you're talking about. Don't you, Julian? She pressed gently. The little girl from the garden, the one you called Elara. Her name was Ellie. Ellie Johnson. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Ellie. Elara. The similarity was so obvious, so simple, that he had never once considered it. It was the kind of mistake only a child could make, and only an adult obsessed with the fantasy, not the reality, could overlook. Ellie Johnson. He repeated the name, feeling foreign, and yet intimately familiar on his tongue. He looked around his study at the maps, the charts, the monument to his global search. A cold dread began to creep up his spine. What happened to them? Mrs. Gable's face was a mask of sorrowful memory. Your father accused Thomas of stealing your mother's Fabergé egg. He fired him, ruined him, threw them out like they were nothing. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. But Thomas never took it, Julian. I know because I was the one who found it a month later. It had rolled under a cabinet in the library. When I told your father, he ordered me to be silent. He said it was better for everyone if the matter was considered closed. The air in the room grew thick, heavy. Julian felt like he couldn't breathe. Every memory of his father, cold, demanding, perfect, was fracturing. Why? Julian whispered the question a plea. I didn't understand it then. Mrs. Gable confessed, her voice trembling slightly. But I found out years later from Mr. Pendleton's father, who was your grandfather's accountant. Your father had made a series of disastrous investments. He was on the verge of financial ruin. He sold the egg secretly to cover his debts and staged the theft to explain its disappearance to your mother and grandfather. Thomas Johnson. He was just a convenient scapegoat, a gardener. Who would believe him over Alistair Vance? The revelation struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. His search was not just a fool's errand. It was built on the foundation of a monstrous lie. His cherished memory, the one pure thing from his childhood, was inextricably linked to the destruction of an innocent family. His mind raced, connecting the dots. Ellie Johnson, a girl who disappeared, a woman who worked in his home, who looked at him with sad, knowing eyes. The flowers, the strawberries, the dream. Maya. He breathed the name, catching in his throat. Oh God, Maya! Mrs. Gable simply nodded, her eyes filled with tears. She's been right here all along. The truth once revealed was a blinding, merciless light. Julian stood frozen in his study, Mrs. Gable's words echoing in the sudden vast silence of his understanding. Maya, Elara, Ellie. The names swirled in his mind, finally coalescing into a single devastating image, the face of the woman who quietly cleaned his home, her features now superimposed over the laughing, sun-kissed face of the girl from his memories. $35 million. Private jets, former MI6 agents. He had marshaled the forces of a small army to search the globe, while the answer to his quest was just down the hall, dusting his furniture, living under the weight of a secret he was too blind and arrogant to see. The scale of his folly was crushing, but it was the revelation about his father that truly gutted him. Alistair Vance, the man whose approval he had sought his entire life, the titan of industry he had tried to emulate, was not just cold, he was cruel. He had built his recovery on the ruins of an innocent man's life. Julian's grief was a cold, sharp thing. He wasn't grieving his father. He was grieving the lie he had structured his entire existence around. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Her shift ended an hour ago," Mrs. Gable replied softly. "She lives in a small apartment in Queens." He wanted to race out of the building, jump in his car, and drive to her immediately. But what would he say? How could he possibly begin to unravel the tapestry of lies and injustice that connected their lives? An apology felt insultingly small. An explanation felt like an excuse. He spent the night in a state of tormented wakefulness. He didn't sleep. Instead, he walked through his penthouse, seeing it for the first time through Maya's eyes. He saw the cold, impersonal opulence, the sterile environment he called a home. He touched the flowers she had arranged, a burst of wild, untamed life in the geometric severity of the room. He ran his hand over the polished surfaces and imagined her hands doing the same work, her thoughts hidden behind a mask of quiet service. He saw the 1,000 moments he had missed, the flicker of recognition in her eyes he had dismissed as deference, the way she sometimes paused by the window that faced east towards Maine, the deep, ingrained sadness he had been too self-absorbed to ever question. He had looked right at her day after day and seen nothing but a function, a ghost in his own home. The next morning, he didn't summon her. He didn't order her to his presence like an employer. He knew he had forfeited that right forever. He obtained her address from Mrs. Gable and drove himself. He left the gleaming Bentley in the garage and took a simple black town car, wanting no symbol of the Vance wealth to precede him. Her apartment building was a modest, pre-war brick building in a quiet neighborhood. It was a world away from his glass tower in Manhattan. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he were the ghost, now haunting a life he had no right to enter. He found her name, M. Johnson, on a small handwritten label next to the buzzer for apartment 4B. His finger hovered over the button, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and a desperate need for absolution. He pressed it. A moment later, her voice, cautious and questioning, crackled through the intercom. "Yes." He couldn't speak. He pressed the button again. There was a pause, then the sharp buzz of the door unlocking. He pushed it open and walked into a clean, narrow hallway that smelled of lemon polish and old wood. He climbed the 4 flights of stairs, his expensive leather shoes echoing on the linoleum. She was waiting at her open door, her expression a mixture of shock and apprehension. She was dressed simply in jeans and a soft grey sweater, her hair pulled back. Without her uniform, she looked different. Younger, more vulnerable, but also more herself. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice tight. "What are you doing here?" He stood before her, the vast gulf of 30 years and a universe of secrets between them. The carefully rehearsed speeches he had composed during the drive evaporated. All he could do was look at her truly, look at her for the first time. He saw the little girl from the garden, hidden in the lines around her eyes, in the determined set of her jaw. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He swallowed and finally managed to get a single word out. It was a question, a plea, a confession, all in one. Ellie. The name, her true name, hung in the air between them. For a moment, she didn't react. Her face remained a perfect, unreadable mask. Then her composure, the carefully constructed dam she had built around her heart for 30 years, began to crack. Her lips trembled. Her eyes, those kind, sad eyes, filled with tears. The dam broke. It wasn't a gentle weeping. It was a storm of grief, a raw, visceral outpouring of decades of suppressed pain, anger, and loss. The sound was agonizing. He had expected shouting accusations, hatred. He was not prepared for this tidal wave of pure, undiluted sorrow. He instinctively took a step forward, wanting to comfort her, but he stopped himself. What comfort could he offer? He was the living symbol of her pain, the son of the man who had caused it all. When the storm of tears subsided, she finally spoke, her voice ragged and sharp with fury. "Do you have any idea?" She whispered the words, trembling with intensity. "You with your $35 million game of hide and seek. You were searching for a memory. My father died searching for a job. He died believing the world saw him as a thief. Your father didn't just fire him, Mr. Vance. He blacklisted him. He destroyed him." She gestured around her small, simple apartment. "This is what's left. This is the life your family's lie afforded us. While you were building an empire, I was scrubbing floors and holding my dying father's hand, telling him I believed him." Each word was a perfectly aimed blow, and Julian didn't flinch. He absorbed every single one, knowing he deserved it all. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't defend his father. He didn't try to explain his own ignorance. He simply stood there and took it, letting her truth in all its brutal, ugly glory finally have its voice. "I know," he said, his own voice cracking. "Mrs. Gable told me. About the egg. About my father." Her eyes widened in shock. That was the one thing she hadn't expected. "He sold it!" Julian continued, forcing the shameful words out. "He sold it to cover his debts and let your father take the fall. The life I have, it was built on that lie. The money I spent looking for you, it was born from the crime that was committed against your family." The confession hung in the small hallway, raw and absolute. For the first time, they weren't employer and employee, billionaire and maid. They were just two people trapped in the wreckage of a past that was not of their making, finally facing the truth of it all. The reckoning had begun. The silence that followed Julian's confession was heavier than any words could have been. Maya Ellie stared at him, the anger in her eyes slowly being replaced by a profound, weary sadness. The truth she had carried alone for so long was finally outshared, and the burden of it seemed to settle on both of them. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice devoid of its earlier fire, now just tired. "An apology, forgiveness." "I don't have the right to ask for either of those," Julian said quietly. "Forgiveness is yours to give, and I haven't earned it. And an apology is just a word. It doesn't undo 30 years of damage. It doesn't bring your father back." He stood there, stripped of his power, his wealth, his name. He was just Alistair Vance's son, the inheritor of a terrible debt. "I came here," he said, meeting her gaze directly, "to give you the truth, and to tell you that I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to build something good from the ruins of what my father destroyed." She didn't invite him in. They stood in the doorway of her apartment, the neutral ground of the hallway, serving as their confessional. Over the next hour, he laid everything bare. He told her about the loneliness of his childhood, how her memory was the only beacon. He explained not as an excuse, but as a confession, how his father's emotional cruelty had blinded him, turning him into a man who only understood value in terms of dollars, who could look at a person and see only a service. She in turn told him everything. She spoke of her father's slow decline, his loss of pride, his quiet death. She told him about the years of struggle, the constant moving, the fear of being recognized as the thief's daughter. She painted a vivid, painful picture of the life that had been stolen from her. By the end, they were both emotionally exhausted. There were no easy resolutions, no tearful embraces. The chasm between them was too wide, filled with too much pain. Julian left her apartment that day with a single, clear purpose: atonement. His first act was swift and public. He called a press conference. The business world buzzed, expecting a major announcement about the Apex Logistics merger. Instead, Julian Vance, flanked by a team of lawyers, stood before the cameras and systematically dismantled his own family's legacy. He told the story of Thomas Johnson. He publicly cleared his name, providing documented evidence, including a sworn affidavit from Mrs. Gable and financial records he had unearthed that corroborated his father's secret sale of the Fabergé egg. He announced the establishment of the Thomas Johnson Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to providing legal aid and support for those wrongly accused of crimes. He seeded the foundation with an initial endowment of $100 million. The news exploded. It was a scandal of epic proportions, a public act of self-flagellation that stunned the elite circles of New York. The Vance name, once a symbol of power and success, was now tied to a story of cruel deception. The company's stock plummeted. His board of directors was in an uproar. But Julian was resolute. He was tearing down the house his father had built on a lie, so that something honest could be built in its place. He didn't see Ellie for weeks. She had understandably quit her job immediately. He sent her a letter not asking to see her, but simply informing her of the steps he was taking. He also included a legal trust, transferring a significant portion of his personal fortune to her not as a payment, but as restitution. It was the money and much more that his family's actions had cost hers over the decades. She refused it. A courier returned the legal documents to his office, unsigned with a single handwritten note. "My father's name is all I ever wanted back. You've given him that. I will not take your family's money." Her pride, her integrity, was a rebuke to his entire way of life. He had thought he could fix things with money, the only tool he had ever known how to use. He was wrong. He realized then that true atonement wasn't about grand public gestures or massive financial transfers. It was about personal change. He began to dismantle his own life, selling the sterile penthouse, firing the legion of staff that insulated him from the world. He moved into a smaller, more modest apartment. He started spending his days not in the boardroom, but at the newly established foundation, listening to stories from people whose lives had been shattered by injustice. He learned to see people, not as assets or liabilities, but as individuals with their own stories, their own pain. The $35 million he had spent searching for a ghost now seemed like the price of his education. It was the cost of learning how to open his eyes. One day, 3 months after their confrontation, he received an email. It was from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line was simply, "The Garden." The email was from Ellie. It was short and to the point. "The foundation is a good thing. My father would have liked it. But it needs a gardener. Someone who knows how to make things grow again." The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, unassuming in Julian's inbox, yet it landed with the force of a tectonic shift. The subject line was just 2 words: "The Garden." For 3 months he had existed in a self-imposed purgatory, dismantling his father's corrupt legacy and building the foundation that bore Thomas Johnson's name. He had poured his energy and fortune into it, but it was a soulless enterprise without the one person whose approval truly mattered. He had sent the letter of restitution had it returned, and respected her silence. Now this. His heart hammered against his ribs as he clicked it open. The foundation is a good thing. My father would have liked it. But it needs a gardener. Someone who knows how to make things grow again. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an absolution. It was an opening. A single narrow path forward through the wreckage of their past. He wrote back immediately, his hands unsteady on the keyboard, suggesting a place to meet. Not his office, not a neutral cafe, but the only place on earth that was truly theirs. A week later, he was driving north the sleek, anonymous town car, eating up the miles toward the coast of Maine. The city's concrete and glass gave way to the dense, dark green of pine forests. With every mile, he felt like he was traveling back in time. He passed the old general store, now a trendy organic market, and the small fishing marina, its boats bobbing in the familiar grey water. These were the landmarks of a childhood he had tried to forget, a past he was now desperately trying to reclaim and redeem. He had bought back the entire estate, a transaction that had taken his lawyers weeks to untangle. He hadn't set foot on the property since he was a teenager. As he turned onto the long, winding driveway, flanked by crumbling stone walls, a knot of apprehension tightened in his stomach. The mansion rose into view, a Gothic skeleton against the overcast sky. Paint was peeling from the magnificent eaves, windows were dark and empty, and the once immaculate lawns were now fields of knee-high grass. It looked like a haunted house, a monument to decay. He had no intention of ever living in it again. She was already there, standing near the great weathered oak tree that marked the entrance to the formal gardens. She wasn't looking at the house, but out toward the sea. She wore practical boots, jeans, and a warm woolen coat, looking as though she belonged to the rugged landscape in a way he, in his expensive cashmere sweater, never could. An awkward silence stretched between them as he got out of the car. The only sound was the cry of a distant gull and the wind rustling through the overgrown grass. "It's smaller than I remember," she said, her voice, even as she finally turned to look at the mansion. "The house." "And colder?" Julian added, his own voice sounding hollow. "I think it was always cold." He didn't lead her on a tour of the decaying splendor. Instead, he walked her past the main grounds, their footsteps rustling through fallen leaves, their path taking them to the far side of the estate. They walked in silence, a shared understanding passing between them that the house held nothing for them. The real destination lay beyond. He found the old stone wall, half swallowed by a riot of ivy, and located the creaking, rust-eaten iron gate. He had to put his shoulder into it to force it open. As they stepped through, it was like entering another world. The forgotten rose garden was a breathtaking spectacle of wild, defiant life. It was chaos, but a beautiful chaos. Ancient gnarled rose bushes, the ones her father had so lovingly tended, had grown into thorny, sprawling monsters, yet they were covered in blooms of deep crimson, pale pink, and creamy white. Weeds and wildflowers grew in a thick carpet between them, and the air was heavy with the rich, heady scent of damp earth salt from the sea, and the perfume of 1,000 resilient roses. The garden had not died in their absence. It had simply returned to its own wild heart. "I thought," Julian began, his voice hesitant, the words he had rehearsed 100 times, suddenly feeling inadequate. "I've spent my entire life around things that are built. Skyscrapers, corporations, financial portfolios, all cold, all structured. My father taught me how to acquire things, how to control them. He never taught me how to nurture anything." He turned to face her, his gaze direct and stripped of all pretense. The Thomas Johnson Foundation is just an entity right now, a name on a building money in a bank account. It helps people, yes, but it has no soul. It needs one. It needs a heart. I want this place, he said, gesturing to the wild garden around them, to be that heart. I want to tear down all the formal gardens, let the land heal, and turn this part of the estate into a sanctuary. A retreat for the families the foundation helps. A place where they can come to breathe, to heal. A place where things can grow again. He took a breath, the vulnerability of the moment pressing in on him. But I can't do it. I don't know how. I would just throw money at it, and it would end up being another cold, perfect, lifeless space. It needs someone who understands the soil. Someone who knows what it means to be broken and find a way to grow back. He looked at her, his entire plea held in his eyes. It needs a gardener. Ellie didn't answer immediately. She walked deeper into the garden, her hand trailing over the rough bark of the apple tree they used to climb. She bent down and touched the petals of a small purple wildflower, her expression thoughtful, distant. He could see the conflict in her face. This garden was the cradle of her happiest memories, but it was also the precipice from which her life had fallen into ruin. To return here every day would be to live with those ghosts. My father used to say that you couldn't force a garden to be beautiful, she said softly, her back still to him. You had to listen to it, understand what it needed. Sun here, shade there, more water, less pruning. He said it had its own story, and a good gardener just helps it tell that story. She finally turned her eyes clear and filled with a profound, steady light. People are the same. They can't be fixed with money or grand plans. They just need a safe place to grow and the patience to let them find the sun again. She took a step closer to him, her decision made. I'll do it. I'll run this project. But not for you. I will be an employee of the foundation. My salary will come from its board, not from your personal account. We will be partners in this. Equals. It was more than he had hoped for. Equals, he agreed, the word sealing a pact far more significant than any business contract he had ever signed. The following months were a quiet revolution. The sounds of lawyers and press conferences were replaced by the scrape of shovels against stone and the whir of pruning shears. They worked not always side by side, but in tandem. Ellie, with a small team of local landscapers, began the arduous process of reclaiming the garden, not by taming it, but by collaborating with it. Julian handled the logistics, the permits, the architecture for the small, unobtrusive guest cabins that would be built amongst the trees. There was no easy friendship, no sudden erasing of the past. There were days of tense silence, days when the ghosts of their history felt palpably close. But there were also moments of unexpected grace, sharing a flask of coffee on a cold morning, a mutual smile at the discovery of a long dormant flower bed, a shared look of satisfaction as the garden slowly began to reveal its new form, a place both wild and welcoming. They were building something tangible together, and in the shared work, they were building a fragile bridge across the chasm that had separated them. One evening in late summer, they were standing on the stone patio of what would become the main gathering hall, looking out as the sun bled into the horizon. The day's work was done. The air was cool and smelled of cut grass and coming autumn. Then he saw it. A single tiny pinprick of greenish-yellow light blinked in the twilight near the old stone wall. Then another and another. A wave of memory so pure and potent it almost brought him to his knees, washed over him. He looked at Ellie and saw the same wonder reflected in her eyes. The fireflies had returned. Within minutes, The entire garden was alive with their gentle, pulsing choreography, a silent, magical symphony of light. They watched, mesmerized, two lonely children, grown old, being given back a piece of their stolen past. "I have something for you," Julian said, his voice husky with emotion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, dark velvet box. He didn't get on one knee. It was not that kind of gesture. He simply held it out to her. She opened it. Inside, nestled on the velvet, was a brooch in the shape of a firefly. It was a masterpiece of quiet elegance. Its body was brushed platinum, its wings intricately detailed, and its abdomen was a single, flawless, pear-shaped yellow diamond. The stone didn't sparkle with aggressive fire. Instead, it seemed to hold a soft, warm light of its own. "It's not a gift," he said, quickly stumbling over the words, needing her to understand. "It's a replacement, an apology in physical form, the promise we made as children. It was broken. My family's world, a world of power and secrets, broke it. This," he said, his voice gaining strength, "is a new promise. Not that we'll always find the light. That was a child's hope. This is a promise that we will do our best to build the light here for others who have lived in the dark." Ellie looked from the breathtaking jewel to his face. She saw no trace of the arrogant billionaire, no shadow of Alistair Vance's cruel legacy. She saw only Julian, the boy from the garden, now a man who was painstakingly trying to atone, to build, to heal. With a hand that was steady, she reached out and took the box. Her fingers brushed against his, a touch that was fleeting but electric with 30 years of unspoken history. She didn't pin the brooch to her coat. She simply closed the box and held it to her heart, a silent acceptance of the new promise. They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by the gentle glow of the fireflies, not as lovers, but as something far more profound. They were survivors, partners, gardeners of a broken land, ready at long last to begin the slow and patient work of helping things grow. The $35 million search for Elara was over, but Julian and Ellie's journey was just beginning. Their story isn't a fairy tale. It's a testament to the fact that the deepest truths are often hidden in plain sight, and that true redemption isn't about grand gestures, but about the quiet, difficult work of healing. It reminds us that behind every face is a story, and sometimes the people we overlook are the ones we've been searching for all along. If their incredible story of loss, discovery, and atonement moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story with real heart. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more unbelievable true stories that explore the depths of the human experience. What part of their journey resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.